Everyone, please rise. Good afternoon and welcome to the Cade Museum for this May 11th meeting of the Rotary Club of Gainesville. My name is Tom Collette, your Sergeant at Arms, welcoming you today to our meeting. If you have a cell phone, please make sure it's silenced. And if you're watching this after the fact on YouTube, make sure you register your participation by sending us an email to info@rotarygainesville.org. That's info@rotarygainesville.org. We begin each meeting with a song and pledge and sometimes a bad joke. And to do that, we have the one, the only Pete Enwall.
How true it is. Well, how do you tell the difference between an alligator and a crocodile? And the answer is one you'll see later, and the other one is after a while. We're going to sing God Bless America. God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with a light from above. From the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, my home, sweet home. Please join me in pledging allegiance to our flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Pete, very much. Now, welcome to the podium, our president with a special message, Matthew Brady, along with Eric Spivey, who will follow the message with our invocation today.
Hello, fellow Rotarians. As we continue to keep the Prince Reinhardt family in our thoughts and prayers, I want to let the club know about the Rex and Brody Reinhardt Memorial Fund that had been established through the Community Foundation of North Central Florida. The fund is being established in honor of Tammy's grandsons. The fund is independent of Rotary, but we all know what great work the Community Foundation also does in our community. Anyone interested in donating, I provided links to the site in an email earlier today where you can reach out to me. Please continue to pray and lift up Tammy, Mike, Mindy, and all the family during this difficult time. If you feel led to send a card directly, I'm sure Tammy would appreciate the encouraging words. At this time, I will ask all members to join for a moment of silence followed by today's invocation. Please join me.
Let us pray. Merciful Lord, you promise us in the Hebrew Scriptures to always give regard to the weak, to remember us in our times of hardship, and to guide us with your light when we do not know our way. Today, in your mercy, Lord, remember those in our club, community, and families who are weak. May they feel your strength. We pray for those in our worlds who are burdened with grief, whose hearts are heavy, and whose spirits have been crushed. May you become their strength in times of weakness. May you become their shelter from the storm, and may you deliver them from their days of trouble. In your name we pray. Amen.
If you are visiting us or you're a Rotarian here today with a guest, please remain standing. Don Bugos has the microphone to bring to you. Anyone in our esteemed crowd today? Okay, I don't see anybody. We will now go to announcements. We have two of those. First, via Zoom, TJ Pichet. TJ.
Hi, everybody. On Saturday, we're going to be going to the Marjorie Ken Rawlings homestead for one of our fun and fellowship tours. We're going to be starting at 9 a.m. So if you're interested, please reach out to me and please fill out the link on DACTV. Right now, we only have 4 people signed up. So having a lower number makes it difficult to justify having the person out there to give us the tour. So if you're interested, please, please, please sign up. Please come spend some time with us on Saturday morning. And as always, please let me know if you have any ideas for future events.
Thank you, TJ. Next, we have one more announcement, and he's here live today. Greg Young. One fan here.
Thank you, Mike, for clapping. I want to thank everyone for this Saturday that came out to join us. We had a project that TJ brought to our attention out through the SWAG Center. They have the Early Childhood Learning Center, and they needed a fence put up. And we stepped right up, a number of us. Actually, Ryan Thompson, I was hoping would make the announcement today, but he had some office work that he couldn't get away from. He is now the new chair of our Rotary Rebuilding Together committee. So he would normally be making this announcement. I've handed him the baton, but I want to thank everybody that came out Saturday. Mia Jones, we had some new members, Jacob Atium, Patrick Irby from the Rotaract Club as well, Wilbur Holloway, thank you, Wilbur, Tony, and Courtney Evans, or is that Courtney Pache now, TJ, Marcia Eubank and Wes Eubank, Dalton Baker, one of our newest members of the club, and also a friend, non-Rotarian, who TJ just happened to pull off the street and was walking by, named Joseph. He goes, "Hey, Joseph, we're doing this project. You want to come?" Guy stayed there all the whole time, finished it up with us. So it was great. We wrapped up by about 3. So thanks. Give a round of applause to all those guys. Thank you.
Now it's time for us to get into the meat and potato of the meetings, if you will. Please welcome back to the podium your president, Matthew Brady.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom. And Greg and all of you, thank you for making that happen. We'll circulate some pictures, either Facebook or send out email. The fence looked great. It was well needed. This was a project that was a part of that update for do-goodery that I sent out. That was one of the items listed in there. And that's a combination of both monetary resources and volunteer and work out there. So thank you very much. You know, so many have worked this year to create innovative and new opportunities for fellowship and service during this pandemic, and how we can still be relevant and meaningful. I was kind of working on year-end goals and looking at it, the things that Rotary International asked you to do. And I was looking at that the past week. You know, I was looking at fellowship, and of course, you know, we're kind of missing that mark of historical participation in fellowship, and understandably, TJ's done an amazing job and some others in creating innovative ways, but it just hasn't made sense, right? But what stood out is that we're blowing the doors off of service in our community during this time. And what more applicable with so much going on to be able to do that. So hats off and an amazing round of applause to each and every one of you for that support. That said, I regretfully, late in sending, not too late, but a little bit late, I sent out an email, and I want to also communicate that due by Saturday are nominations for Outstanding Leadership Awards. As we all know, Brent Williams was a very important Rotarian to our club, and many of us as members. We're honored and blessed that Naomi is very active and supportive of the club today. But, you know, I sent out an email because there's a nomination every year for both the D. Brent Williams and Al Watson, both served as symbols of the best of Rotary. And so please look at that. There's still time to make a nomination. for that. If you have any questions, please let me know, but that can all be done by yourself individually and direct through those links. So last announcement, I missed, if you're on Zoom and have not been here, you may have noticed a little bit different scenery, and I did not announce last week, but we continue to grow in live attendance as things improve for us in our society and health-wise. And as we talked about in the very beginning, we were limited on space upstairs, but we had the opportunity to come downstairs, and we're downstairs as of last week, and we're continuing to grow our numbers live. And with that, we're continuing to work very hard along with the team here at the Cade to do it in a responsible and safe way the best we can. So trying to do that very good. So if you notice a different scenery, that's it. And we're still in the same building. And when the time is right for you, if you have not had an opportunity, welcome to join. Look for those links to sign up, and look forward to seeing. We have 3 or 4 that I think are first meeting back in maybe the past year, and it's great to see new faces and look forward to seeing more in the days ahead. That said, I am now going to hand over. Our speaker today is via Zoom, and our speaker chair that's continued to do an amazing job this year. She will introduce today's speaker, Miss Jenny Van Hart. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am not at the beach, but I was here on Saturday. So I figured this would be a good background for today. Wishful thinking. Alexandria Brady-Mine is a social entrepreneur and an activist on a mission to empower over 1 million students to become young change makers. She founded the Human Projects at the age of 17. What the heck were you doing at 17? Barely finishing high school, probably. Since 2017, the Human Projects has worked with over 1.6 million program participants in 118 countries to empower them to solve human rights issues in their own communities. Funded by organizations including General Motors, T-Mobile, and the Jane Goodall Institute, Alexandria is dedicated to continuing to build and rapidly scale innovative human rights education programs that equip students with the tools they need to make a difference. From TED Talks to the covers of magazines, she is a woman to be reckoned with, and I'm excited to hear her speak today. Please help me welcome Alexandria.
Hello, it's wonderful to be here today. My name is Alexandria Brady-Mine, and I'm here to speak about empowering young change makers through human rights education, and a little bit about my story through change making. So a little bit about me. I have always been very passionate about change making. My parents were very involved in the community and were always encouraging me to volunteer and to look for ways to help outside of volunteering. So whether that was noticing a community issue and saying like, hey, Alexandria, what do you think you could do to solve that? Or what do you think you could do to just play some small role in helping? My grandmother was a principal, and she passed on her love of learning and her love of teaching to me. I'm very involved in teaching through human rights education and just speaking with young change makers. So I'm really passionate about education, about learning, and about teaching. And one thing many people are surprised to hear about me is that I'm actually a 4th-year mechanical engineering student. I got involved in engineering when I was a junior in high school through the University of Florida. And I started doing research on the ways that engineering can be used to improve other people's lives. So currently I do engineering research on polymers and cell material interactions, which may not sound like mechanical engineering, but it's studying the forces that cells are experiencing. And I'm very passionate about the ways that engineering can be used to improve the world and the ways that engineering concepts can be used to improve the world. So actually we'll talk about later the club curriculum, which helps our clubs create a positive difference. And it's based on the engineering design process. So I'm passionate about finding ways that we can merge engineering and change making. My journey into change making started in elementary school with a program called Rainbow Readers. One of my elementary school teachers told me that there were some students in our community who didn't have access to as many books as we had. And I absolutely love reading. I love books. And so at the time, I thought I had to be able to do something to help. So I convinced my mom to take me to local preschools where we would read books to them, and then we would leave the books for the students to enjoy later. And that was my very first like mini nonprofit. And it was my start into the world of change making. And I really loved it. So I kept looking for new ways that I could help my community. And pretty soon after, the Haiti earthquake occurred. So, I mean, I couldn't go to Haiti, but I read that one of the best ways to help was to fundraise for the Haiti Earthquake Relief Fund. So I got together a team of my friends and we coordinated to create and sell jewelry to fundraise for the Haiti Earthquake Relief Fund. And then I think a year later, we used the same model as Make It for Haiti because we heard that there were kids who would have to spend the winter break in the hospital. And we wanted to find a way to brighten up their day just a little bit. So we recruited and coordinated teams again to make and sell jewelry to be able to fundraise and purchase art supplies for children at Shands Hospital. So as I was experiencing all of these ways to create change and like these miniature nonprofits, I started to wonder where my peers were. Why weren't my friends and my other peers participating in creating change? Like, did they not have any ideas? Were they just not interested in it? And so I started talking to them. And a lot of them had ideas to help their communities, or they didn't have an idea, but they were like, I really want to do something to help. And they didn't really know where to get started. And that eventually led to me founding Human Projects with the goal of empowering young change makers, and eventually would use human rights to empower young change makers. And essentially, the goal in the beginning was to let young people know that they had the power to make a positive difference. So we started with the Young Changemakers campaign, which had the sole purpose of just letting young people know that they had the power to make a positive impact in their community. Whether it was through like starting their own organization or volunteering or getting involved with something that was already happening, it was just like the goal was just to get young people involved. And as that campaign started to gain momentum, I was really amazed to receive messages from young people all over the world, just letting me know about their ideas to help their communities, or saying they wanted to get involved, but they didn't know how. And so it started as really informal mentorship. A young person would come to me and have questions, and I would try to answer those questions the best I could, or I would connect them to some other expert who maybe had more experience than I did with whatever issue they were dealing with. And eventually that organization became unmanageable. There were too many young change makers and not enough organization. And so we ended up formalizing the mentorship into clubs. And the goal of clubs was to build solutions to human rights issues led by young people living in the communities they serve. So we had many questions that would come up over and over throughout conversations, such as how do we know that our community actually wants this issue to be solved? How do we know that our project will work? What do we do if something goes wrong? And so we built a 12-week curriculum to help young people go from having absolutely no idea what they wanted to do to developing a full, like, solid plan to create a solution to a human rights issue. And essentially what they would do is they would brainstorm issues. They would go to their community and ask what issues the community wanted solved. And then they would spend a lot of time just working by themselves and taking ideas back to their communities and selecting which ideas would be the most beneficial to their communities. And that method of going to the communities and the people directly impacted by these issues meant that by the time they had developed the project, the community was involved, they were invested, and they were excited for it to be built. And so that led to much more successful projects. We also tried to include ways for them to solve common issues that we came across, and we let them know where they could go for other resources if they had particular issues. For example, they could come to us, send us an email, and we would try to connect them with an expert. So the human projects ended up growing pretty significantly from a campaign into a global nonprofit. We've had over 1.6 million program participants, over 213,000 programs and lessons taught, in 118 countries. As the Human Projects was developing, we realized that there were young people who would not be likely to join clubs or to start clubs. And that was because they didn't see themselves as change makers. And so starting a club would be very intimidating. And we wanted to find a way to reach out to those young people who didn't see themselves as change makers or who had never even heard the word change making. And so we found the best way to do that was through the school system, because the majority of young people we were working with were going to school. So we started developing a variety of human rights educational programs for educators, nonprofits, community groups, and individuals. All of those educational programs are completely free of charge, and they're accessible to anyone who wants to use them. The programs essentially are focused on teaching the individuals who are participating about a human right, and then encouraging communication, whether that's as a classroom or with the community group or with parents or friends about that human rights issue, to get a better understanding of how that human right is impacting their community. And then to come up with some idea or even some small way that they can have a positive impact on that human rights issue in their community. And so we started distributing these human rights educational resources to educators, and we realized that they were very effective. So we started doing monthly programs centered around an event such as International Day of Human Rights or International Day of Science, so that our educators would have a wide variety of different events that they could center their human rights conversations around. We also started several other programs, including Young Human Rights Changemakers. The goal of Young Human Rights Changemakers was to bring the club model into classrooms. So we had a lot of educators reach out to us saying, I would love to start a club, but this, and this won't work in my classroom. And so we used the club curriculum to create a service learning curriculum that would work well in a classroom setting. And we partnered with these educators to essentially build a human rights project over the course of the semester or over the course of the year. We would work with those educators one-on-one if they had questions or if they needed our help. And they would use that curriculum to eventually develop a full human rights program with their students. One of the Young Human Rights Changemakers projects that happened, I think a few months ago, the last time we ran the program, was the creation of environmental advocacy group. So they were talking to their community about the environment and the ways that they could help improve their environment and why it would be beneficial to their community. And then working with them to organize a group to go out and plant trees in their communities so that they could reduce the effects of deforestation. The Teaching Human Rights Fellowship was essentially developed because there were places where it was not feasible to bring human rights curriculum into classrooms. So there are some places where it's very difficult to add something new to the curriculum. Like the educators would have to go through a lot of steps to be able to make that happen. And so it made more sense to work on human rights education from a community group standpoint instead of from a traditional educational standpoint. So essentially what happens is we select a cohort of about 25 teaching human rights fellows, And they meet with us, they develop a plan to bring human rights education to their communities. And then we have one-on-one meetings to make sure the plan is feasible, and we work with them to develop that plan. And throughout that process, they're constantly in communication with each other and with us through different training programs to make sure that their plan will work. The Young Changemakers Archive is actually one of our newest programs, and the goal is to collect and publicly share information on the impact and experiences of young changemakers around the world. So in our research, we found that there is not very much information available on young changemakers, whether it's nationally, so like in the US, or globally. There just isn't anyone who seems to be able to say there is an estimated number of young changemakers. This is the estimated impact they're having on the world. And so we wanted to start collecting that data and laying the groundwork for better research to happen surrounding young changemakers. We also wanted to create a place where young changemakers could be celebrated and could be acknowledged for their contributions, and for upcoming young changemakers who were looking for role models to be able to go and see people working on similar issues to the ones they were interested in, to be inspired by them, and to be able to reach out to those actual young changemakers and speak with them about the work they're doing. We also have the Stories of Changemakers podcast, which is focused on taking a journey through the stories of changemakers. So changemakers come onto the podcast and talk about their beginning in changemaking, what they hope to do in the future, their advice for young changemakers, and the ways that different life experiences have shaped their changemaking journey. A few upcoming programs are the 30 Human Rights Textbook, which has information on the 30 human rights and the individual young changemakers working to achieve them. We have a full draft form of the textbook, however, it is not edited or ready for publication yet. But when it is, it will be publicly available for free to anyone who would like to use it, and it's mostly focused on middle and high school audiences. We also have an upcoming program called Conversations with Young Changemakers, with the goal of empowering the next generation of young leaders by bringing changemakers to classrooms as guest speakers. So this program was meant to launch about a month after COVID started. So we've had to postpone it indefinitely until we're able to get changemakers into our classrooms. So here at the Human Projects, we're really passionate about empowering young people to create change. And we found that 4 of the main ways that we can empower these young people is through using their passions, through educating them, through connecting them, and through encouraging them. So we encourage young people to use their passions and their skills to help solve community problems. It's much less intimidating to jump into a project knowing that you're already good at some portion of it. For example, if you are really passionate about art, then using your art to spread awareness about a human rights issue, or using your art to go volunteer at a nonprofit that could use an artist. And so by involving your passion, not only are young people more likely to start getting involved, they're also more likely to stay involved because it involves something that they already care about and enjoy doing. We also believe that it's really important to provide educational opportunities for young people to learn about the real world and about global issues. It's difficult or really impossible to solve an issue that you don't know exists. And so by teaching young people about what's happening in the world and what's happening in their communities, they have an opportunity to learn about these issues and to start thinking about solutions to those issues. Most young people do not have very much of a network just because networking isn't really taught in elementary school. So it's important to help young people connect with resources they need to make their work successful. So if you happen to know a young person who has like this great idea to help their community, but say needs someone to help them build a website. Maybe you could connect them with a friend who works on website building, and that friend could help them decide what software to use for their website. And last of all, but really most importantly, is encouragement. I've been so lucky to have amazing people around me encouraging me and letting me know that my dreams are possible. So just letting young people know that they're never too young to make a difference can make a huge impact. This is my contact information and the contact information for the Human Projects. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Alexandria. And if there's anyone here at the Cade Museum who'd like to ask a question, please raise your hand. Don Bugos has the wireless microphone. He'll bring that around for questions. And if you're online, type them into chat and we will get them to our wonderful presenter today. Anyone in the crowd have a question? Please raise your hand. One in the back, get that one first if you will, Don. Then we have one online as well.
I have two questions. One is what is the typical size of one of your clubs? And the other question is, do you get, what sort of pushback do you get from either governments or religious institutions or other groups that I might not be able to think of?
Yes, so the typical size of a club is like 10 to 15 members. They're generally pretty small. And the majority of our impact is not through clubs, it's through educational programs. So working through educators, generally partnering with full schools or even school districts at a time to be able to share human rights educational programs is the main way that we've grown. As far as pushback, we have been very lucky to be able to avoid a pretty significant portion of pushback. We generally are very focused on trying to provide human rights information in the most distanced way possible. So, of course, it's impossible to be truly unbiased, but trying as hard as we can to remove our own personal biases, making sure that our team represents a wide variety of political and cultural views so that there is someone to catch it before it goes out. And then just trying to present factual information and encourage the participants to come up with their own ideas surrounding whatever the issue is that we're talking about. So I think that's how we've avoided most of the pushback surrounding human rights education.
Hi. Thank you, Alexandria. Brendan Shortley. I have two questions. I put the first one online so I wouldn't surprise you too much with it, but I'll just verbalize it and then I'll have a follow-up question. The areas of focus on your map was very impressive, but do you have any plans to move into Asia? And also with that, the follow-up question is, what barriers do you foresee and what barriers have you overcome in terms of language barriers and expert resources, for example, your tree project and other engineering projects? Even though you're a great mechanical engineer, it sounds like you probably need other experts. Thank you.
Yes, so we definitely plan to expand really as far as we can. I would love to be working in every country in the world. And so a lot of that will come down to the fact that the majority of our growth is occurring through people who know each other. So we work with educators and then they tell the other educators in their school and those educators share with their communities. And so that's how the Human Project has been spreading for the past few years, as well as some ad campaigns to encourage people to get involved. But I think that's why the majority of our work is happening in Africa at the moment. But we are absolutely working to expand, and I would love for us to work in every country in the world eventually. And would you mind repeating your last question?
Sure, sorry. That's why I broke it up, because it's complicated. I'm assuming your language barrier is a huge obstacle as you go from country to country. How do you overcome that, and in terms of online presence and also just interaction? And also, how do you bring your expert resources to bear and combine them with the community to accomplish whatever project you have for that community?
Yeah, so for the language barrier portion, we are actually working to translate all of our educational programs into, I think, 10 languages. So we spent last summer working with a team of translators to translate all of our educational materials. And although they aren't available on the website, they are available if anyone emails us, just because we haven't had a chance to get them all double checked by another team of expert translators. We don't want mistranslations, which is really common in human rights, just because there's such nuanced conversations that changing a word can change the entire meaning of what we're saying. So that's basically how we've been working to overcome the language barrier. There's also just Google Translate. So someone sends us an email in French and we put it in Google Translate, and we do our best to respond by letting them know, like, hey, we had to put this in Google Translate to understand what you were saying, but this is the best version of the response we can give you. And if it doesn't make sense, then just let us know and we'll try again. We also are very lucky to have a team that represents a lot of countries and speaks a lot of languages. So quite often we are able to find someone who has either been on the team or is currently on the team, or who has volunteered with us, who's willing to translate for some of those conversations. So that's basically how we deal with the language barrier so far. And then we have on the ground volunteers. So if we have someone who wants to run a program in a particular place that does not speak any English, then we can help them find someone in that place who is willing to volunteer and translate the educational materials for them, or teach the lessons. So translate as they're teaching those lessons to the individuals who don't speak English.
Thank you. My name is Jacob. I really don't have a lot of questions, but great presentation. Mine is actually a suggestion. I don't know if you ever heard of Human Library or Human
yeah.
Book Library, because they're also in 80 countries, but I think it would be a great complementary to what you're doing, especially they bring human being to be the books instead of digitally. So I don't know if you heard of that, and do you see them to be helping you and educating through experiences? Thank you.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. I have heard a little bit about them. I think that it was where people kind of have interviews with other people, but more through storytelling and individual experiences. So the original tagline of the Human Projects was "One story can change the world." And we were very, very focused on storytelling as a method to humanize human rights education. And it's something that we are still very passionate about. So yeah, I would absolutely love to reach out to them and see if they're interested in working together.
Your next question comes from Jenny Van Hart online. Alexandria, have you encountered Rotaries interact or Rotaract during your work across the globe?
No, I don't think I have. I don't think so, but I'm not positive.
Thank you. Next one from the crowd here.
Good afternoon. I'm Deborah Newell. I think that this is an amazing concept, and to be able to engage youth in things that they're passionate about is excellent, because they can change the world. So along with that, I was wondering if you could highlight for us possibly the most potent downstream effects from 2 or 3 of the projects that have occurred so far in the communities.
Yes, absolutely. So one of the very earliest projects that was a Human Projects Club was by Joachim Rillo, and it was called Mind Movers. And essentially the goal of that project was to help young people get involved with STEM and to help them get into higher paying jobs. So to get them involved in STEM, to continue going through STEM as they continued with their education, and eventually to use STEM in their career fields. And although those students haven't graduated yet, they were elementary school students in 2017 or 2018. So they haven't moved into the job force, but the majority of them are still involved in STEM, are still really passionate about STEM, and are taking like advanced STEM classes in their schools.
Your next question, also from online, from the Zoom chat, from Dana Miller. What inspired you to develop the 30 Human Rights book, and who contributed to it?
So we were inspired to develop that textbook, as well as the majority of the educational materials, not only because we wanted to involve young people who weren't already involved in change making, but also because there is not a lot of human rights educational materials that are completely free and that are not religiously affiliated or like strongly affiliated with a political source. So we wanted to find a way that we could provide the most like unbiased version of human rights to classrooms, because one of the main reasons in some countries that they were not allowing human rights to be taught, or that they were very hesitant to teach about it, was because it was affiliated with something else that they disagreed with. And so that's why we ended up creating the textbook, because I don't think there is currently an available completely free human rights textbook online. And we wanted to make sure that we had like really high quality human rights educational materials available, and that those human rights educational materials have a focus on creating change. So not just teaching about human rights, but also encouraging young people to learn about human rights and then actually apply what they're learning to improving their communities. So yeah, that's why we ended up developing the 30 Human Rights textbook and most of our other human rights educational resources. And as far as who's working on the textbook, it's a really significant team of individuals. It's both our education team, which is a full-time team at the Human Projects, as well as our interns for the past summer and the upcoming summer will be working on editing the textbook and compiling the resources, as well as the archive team who is responsible for getting all of the interviews of the young change makers who are going in that textbook. So yeah, it's a huge group effort.
Final question for you, Alexandria, from Jenny Van Hart. How do you manage the clubs in 118 countries?
So there are not clubs in 118 countries. The 118 countries is including like the programs that are run by educators. We could not manage that many clubs. It would not be possible. But the way that we're able to do it with educators and programs that are happening in all those different countries is, well, mass emailing. So not mass emailing in the sense of spam, but in the sense of like, okay, we need to get this message out to like 3,000 schools. So how do we do that? We use mail merge to be able to distribute information very rapidly. We also have like office hours where if someone has a question and it's pretty short, they can just like hop on a call with us and ask their question and get their answer really quickly. We're always checking email. We have a bunch of people whose like job is just to check email and help out whoever has a question. And then we have volunteers who are essentially working on the ground to connect those educators. So like a young person on the ground who is going to schools and saying like, hey, would you be interested in teaching like about human rights? And making sure that those young people have a solid understanding of how the programs run so that they can be the first point of contact before they come to us is how we manage all of the moving parts.
Ladies and gentlemen, please a nice round of applause for our presenter today, Alexandria.
Alexandria, thank you so much for not just presenting today, but for the great work that you're doing around the world. I was chatting a little bit with Jenny, and you definitely have the heart and passion of a Rotarian in a different way, in a different label. This year's theme for Rotary was Rotary Opens Opportunities, and I believe you are doing that around the world for many young people, and thank you very much. And I would like to send you this small token of appreciation for speaking today, and thank you again. Let's give Alexandria another round of applause. So thank you again. our great future resource in this community, in this world, and our young people. So look forward to that. And as we close out today, we'll end with a quote. Again, if you can on Saturday and would like to do the Fun and Fellowship, please RSVP just so that TJ can coordinate that and make sure it's properly taken care of. So today's quote: "Nothing ever happens in the world that does not happen first inside human hearts." Fulton J. Sheen. Have a great week, Rotarians.